Before we begin, the ongoing genocide onto Gaza has been going on for 10 months and it just shows no signs of stopping. Linked below will be links to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund and Boycott Sanctions Divestment campaign. In any way you want to or can contribute, please do. Every little helps. You'd be surprised. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. On August 11, 2014, the world was shaken upon hearing that Robin Williams had died at 63 after taking his own life. To sum up how the world reacted to losing such an icon and beloved star in such an unexpected and horrific way, it's pretty hard, especially if you were around my age. While Williams' success was pretty solid throughout the 70s, it was the 80s and especially the 90s where he truly exploded, earning himself an Oscar win for Good Will Hunting. It was also around the 90s he did a slew of very popular children's films such as Mrs. Doubtfire, Aladdin and Jumanji to name a few, which really kind of cemented him into the lives of kids who grew up at that time, kind of like a friendly uncle. And man, I felt it. And it really did affect a lot of people. To this day, his legacy is very fiercely protected. An example of this was when unused recordings from his performance as the genie in Aladdin were being repurposed for the Disney Centenary short Once Upon a Studio. This got so much blowback that Josh Gad had to come out to defend its decision. I did see people bring up how distasteful this was, given Williams' rather infamous falling out with Disney over them using his voice and name in the marketing for Aladdin, which he was very much vehemently against, and it was part of the agreement of him doing this in the first place. And I really, really hate to defend Disney here, but come on guys, this was resolved like a decade and a half before he passed away. Like, he came back to voice the genie several times afterwards. Another example came out recently when Joe Rogan talked about Williams being a plagiarist. And like in this example, I got on Rogan's ass too. A lot of people got really angry at this, but the thing is, Williams flat out admitted he did this shit years ago. I mean, I personally don't see the point in bringing this up anyway. The man's been dead for a decade now. But alas, I'll throw up my hands and offer an apology to Rogan. The only one he deserves, really. So you get my point. Man's image is protected a lot. But unfortunately to me, this image was smeared a lot by the circumstances surrounding his death. Due to it being a suicide, people painted Robin as this kind of broken, miserable man. He used his goofy persona as a front. I don't really love that. And I'm not trying to say he didn't have mental health struggles. Rather, famously he did, and this was pretty well known. He was a recovering drug addict for one. But I think to frame his death, in particular to be around a mental health struggle, also ignores his Lewy body dementia. While being misdiagnosed as Parkinson's at the time, it has a pretty noted effect on someone's cognitive ability, and he went into decline really rapidly. His widow Schneider Williams spoke out about this shortly after he died and has become an advocate for this condition. And to be clear, Williams' children have also brought up their father's depression and their own mental health struggles as a result of their father's painful death. They have also very strongly advocated for mental health awareness. The thing is, especially with Zelda, who was a very active social media user, she also shared and embraced what a raunchy, silly, goofy, big-hearted guy he was. And that's the thing. It stopped him from being a comedic icon and turned him into a laugh man stat archetype. Stat? What? It stopped him from being a comedic icon and turned him into a laugh man sad archetype. And I think it's better to see him as a more fully rounded person. One of the things that came up in association with all this stuff is this fucking quote. If you don't know, this is an old joke, but this variation in particular appeared in Alan Moore's Watchmen. Then it got affiliated with Williams' death because I think someone on Reddit used it and, purposed the quote along with the image. Funny enough, this whole laugh man sad aesthetic has become pretty mimetic now, including this particular joke. As 2019 film Joker tried to double down on this, it became a particular punchline of pretentious patter of putting these contrasting feelings together for edgy adolescents in spirit, or just teenagers, morons, who don't notice how silly they look. Another one I saw pop up a lot. And using this in the context of Williams' death and this post-mortem of him being a sad clown man got me super annoyed once I saw the origin of it. It's not just the person who made this image macro who is at fault here. I saw tons of variation of this using contemplative pics of Williams with this quote and attributing it to him. So for one, it implies he came up with this. He didn't. And I don't even mean referring to the plagiarism stuff. It's a quote from a fucking movie he was in. And the context in which it was used is not how the format implies it's used for. Because World's Greatest Dad is a lot of things. Melancholically meditating on the nature of depression is not fucking one of them. World's Greatest Dad is a 2009 film directed by comedian Bobcat Goldthwait. His track record as a filmmaker is spotty. Some films I really like, some I don't, but this is easily his best. Now, this video is about the ending, so presumably you've actually seen it. before watching any of this. But to get our groundings and for a little refresher, Williams plays Lance Clayton, a frustrated and miserable high school English teacher with aspirations to be a writer. Most pointedly, he doesn't actually enjoy writing, he wants the adulation and fame that comes with the success. He opens this film inferring to the famous quote where he talks about,
"My biggest fear in life is that I'm going to end up all alone."
On top of his myriad of issues, his son Kyle is a repugnant, self-centered, sex-obsessed reprobate who talks openly and obsessively about sex and porn, is rude and cutting to everyone around him, and he's not particularly bright or motivated in his academics. Again, you shouldn't be watching this if you haven't seen the film, and it's kind of a spoiler, even though it's the premise of the film. It's an inciting incident, but it also happens like 20-30 minutes into the film. Kyle ends up accidentally choking to death while performing autoerotic asphyxiation, and it leads to Rob Williams give some of the best acting of his entire career. Trust me, if you decided to ignore me and not view this film, I could not recommend watching it enough, even if it's just for this scene. Like, God, we lost such a talent with him. In order to hide the shame of how he died, he decided to make it look like a suicide and writes a note. Once the note gets leaked, it becomes huge, and Lance forges a diary to make it look like Kyle wrote it, and it becomes a major hit. Lance essentially gets everything he wants: the adoration of his peers, his students, and the world at large. But it's based on a lie that his son not only killed himself, but is a gifted genius and hid it from everyone, with the veneer of being an obnoxious asshole. The reality was he wasn't an obnoxious asshole. Quick note, I also see suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary problem attributed to Williams a lot. That's not even from this movie. That dates back to the 80s. In the film, he hears this trite truism from a therapist and regurgitates it on television.
Suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems.
Suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems.
Do you want my job?
No.
It's just another example of his incredible insincerity. And that's the rub. None of this is real. None of these people liked or had time for Lance until they thought his son was a genius. His manuscripts constantly got rejected, and now because of a fluke, he's being asked to submit his own work to publishers. And it's a recurring theme that everything that Lance wants to get himself involved with and get the praise and adoration of everyone around him and the public at large is all baked by self-absorption. Getting the good graces of these people is not as good as it sounds. If there is one redeeming quality to Kyle, while he's not particularly smart, he is actually really perceptive. We see this rather subtly in the way he treats Lance and his only friend Andrew. He picks up on Lance's desire to have his ego boosted, so he's constantly cutting it down by disrespecting his car, making fun of his music taste, particularly with Bruce Hornsby, or making fun of his diving hobby for when he was a teenager he clearly takes a lot of pride in. For Andrew, it's his insecurities and his self-image, so he'll bring up stuff about him being lactose intolerant, his dire home life, or his frigid relation to sex, as he appears to be a late bloomer. Lance even follows his dead son's footsteps later on by attacking Andrew's mother's alcoholism while being challenged about the diary. One of the biggest showcases of this is Kyle reading the shit out of Claire, Lance's co-worker and secret girlfriend at the time.
I mean, what do you think about her personality?
Nah. She's pretty stuck up and she's a phony.
Which she is.
That's right! You're a big fat phony!
It's implied she clings on to Lance because she thinks he'll be a big writer, but when he fails to get published over and over again, she starts gravitating towards a younger teacher, Mike, who does get published in a magazine, and she clearly starts gravitating towards him and blowing Lance off until the letter blows up. And all this falsity, all this stuff of these people now loving Lance and, praising him, being artificial, it starts eating away at him. It's not noticeable to start with, but it comes up in stuff like him talking back to the principal, who's completely changed his tune on Kyle once he thinks he's a massive secret genius, which Lance knows is a lie. He shows a lot of frustration over Claire making a big deal out of her appearance for a show he'll be in and not really her. Students bothering him for weird and strange shit regarding Kyle. He almost seems to be laughing in some way in a television interview, which is very over there due to Williams' rather brilliant performance. He also sees an upswing in the poetry class he teaches. Beforehand, we see students are so unengaged. One of them just plagiarized Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie, which Lance cons him on because...
Jason, I'm white.
Now it's people feigning interest in a fabrication. This movie has a serious hatred for bullshit trend chasing and I love it. The only two people not caught up in this are the two people that Lance seems to show a genuine connection to. One is Andrew, who just knows Kyle too well to buy into this. He's a little clueless and socially awkward around Lance, but he seems to treat him with at least a little bit more compassion and respect than his own son does. The other is his hoarding and introverted neighbor Bonnie. Lance has an easy, friendly rapport with her as they bond over zombie films and getting high. Lance finds real connection connection here, but it's not what his ego desired. So he rejects both these people. As mentioned rather cruelly to Andrew, and dismissing plans he made with Bonnie to play golf with people who don't even care about him or seem to really like him in general. And I think this is a solid build. Not only the guilt with him exploiting Kyle's debt and lying about his son, but the subtle frustration and unease that gets easier picked up when rewatching the movie. When I first saw the ending, it honestly floored me. Lance got everything he wanted. Adulation from his peers, the sincere fixated interests of his girlfriend, his favourite musician Bruce Hornsby coming to the opening of a library wing that's named after Kyle because of Lance lying and saying that he's Kyle's favourite musician. Which, again, if you remember the conversation from the last time, Kyle had no fucking interest in music at all and really laid into Bruce Hornsby because Lance liked him. You can decide what the breaking point is. To me, it's when the kid who seemingly sincerely had suicidal ideation and says Kyle's book saved him. And the gross irony is that Lance's lie was enough to make this guy read something genuine in it and reflect on his own self-worth. I guess the sincerity of this insincerity broke him. He was truly alone because he was in a room surrounded by utter phonies. So he gets to the podium to officially open the wing and spills the entire truth.
He didn't kill himself. Kyle died accidentally while masturbating. And I wrote a suicide note. I also wrote his journal. Thank you.
And this is where that line comes in.
I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is ending up with people who make you feel all alone.
It's not about him wallowing in depression and being worried he won't find people to connect to, like the quote implies in those memes, and being framed as though Williams actually had these worries. Instead, it's a triumphant call to sincerity and finding happiness and self-fulfillment in a way that brings you to people who don't just go along with the insincerity. To punctuate this, we hear Under Pressure, the best use of the song in the film since... Man, I should do a video on this film, huh? A song used by a student to pull a fast one on him instead of taking his passion seriously. He also strips down and dives, something his own son and girlfriend laugh at him for having pride in. Because this is not about how people make you lonely. It's about realizing how lonely people can make you feel. And it gives you the power to take it back for your fuller sense of self instead of living up to those expectations that were making you miserable. The thing is, Lance is pretty awful, however Williams makes him feel so sincere and likable. Unable to find fulfillment because we focus on how everyone around us can give us what we want, rather than hone in on the people who can give us what we need. His bullish douchebag of a son didn't help matters, but he helps Lance get his little perspective even if he has to die to give him that. The movie ends with Andrew forgiving Lance and saying he's a good writer. That same thing that Bonnie said, and that he should keep it up. They end the movie watching zombie films together. To me, Robin Williams has been seen as a symbol of those who hide the depression, brought on by the tragic circumstances surrounding his death. I feel with his work, we can learn an even more valuable lesson. To cut through the shit and not feel so alone being surrounded by the wrong people. May his legend live on beyond the 40s.